So the question I'm answering in this vlog is, how do you start when starting is hard? Recently I started some new paintings, and I was coming at them after a reasonably long period of time of not painting, and I found that I was meeting a bit of resistance about getting started, and you know, any excuse was a valid excuse. It was too cold in the studio, it was raining outside, the work in the garden needed me more, a blocked nose, I couldn't work. So all these things were coming up, and I thought, no, I've just got to get started, because once I'm in it, if I had a bunch of paintings that were sort of midway through and I had problems to solve and I was in them, then I'd love it. But it's just getting started when it's kind of hard. I had to somehow get over that hump. And so what I did was, first of all, I lowered the bar of my expectations. So usually I have a goal of, if I'm working in some paintings or doing my work, I try and do at least 2 hours in the studio a day. And that's kind of, I work my days around it so that that's sort of reasonably non-negotiable. So I lowered the bar and I said, no, that's not where I'm going to aim. I'm going to try and spend 1 hour a day in the studio. And I didn't say that I had to paint, or I didn't really stipulate exactly what I was going to do, but I had to spend an hour in here. And the reason that I did this was that once I'm in here, I will see things that will interest me. I'm much more likely to get excited and start thinking about art and what I could do in my painting and things like that if I'm actually in the right place. If I'm inside or in the garden, I'm distracted and I'm focusing on other things. But if I'm in here, then I'm sort of optimizing the chances of my getting excited about some art. The other thing I did was I had a look at some of my recent work and some older work, and then some work of some of my favorite artists, and just honing in and focusing again on the sort of things that I love and the sort of things that have got me excited before and that continue to get me excited every time I look at them. That was going to hopefully spark something, and it did. It made me feel energized about a new series of work, so that was good. And then just spending that hour in the studio daily, even if I just spent the hour on the phone with a friend, or just tidying up, or cleaning some brushes, or doing that sort of thing, I just got myself into a rhythm of at least coming in here once a day for an hour. And it wasn't long before I was basically forcing myself to start some canvases, cut out the canvas, attach them to the panels, and start gessoing. And all those things are kind of boring, they're not very creative, and they're the sort of hurdles that we have to jump over before we get to the fun stuff. But even starting the creative stuff, even starting putting the paint on and the colours, in those early stages, it doesn't really interest me. I much prefer being in a painting and solving the problems. So I have to create the problems in order to have something to solve. And those early stages of building the layers and creating the problems, I sometimes can feel like I'm just going through the motions. So what do I do about that? So what I did, and this is actually how I start all my paintings, is I start with just laying down some big shapes and colours, and fairly random, quite quickly, without a lot of thought. I always work in multiples, so I'm working in a group of paintings, and so once I've done one, I move on to the next and do this sort of a similar thing to the next one, unless I come up with a different idea. But anyway, this is how I work. So having done that with all my 5 paintings that I've just started, then I ask myself, what's different to this? So the next thing that was different was having laid down the patches of colour, or in some cases laying down some collage with fabric and splashing some dye and some other paint around. the next thing was, what's different to that is putting down some shapes that are more controlled. And the first lot of shapes in this big painting were put down with big brushes. They were done quite quickly. So the next lot of shapes, I was a lot more intentional, a lot more thoughtful, and used smaller brushes and thought about the colours and things like that. So that was the next stage. Then moving on from that and doing that with all of the paintings, I then asked myself, well, so what's different to that? And what's different to the big shapes was drawing over the top. So I draw with pencil or pastel or oil sticks. And given that the previous stage that I had done was quite thoughtful and took a bit of time using a straight edge and being careful about it, with the drawing I wanted to be much looser and expressive and moving through the stage very quickly, so not as much thought, being more sort of intuitive and just going for it. And so these are the sorts of marks that I'm making when I do that. And then, having done that with all of them, I then asked myself, so what's different to that? And then I came up with, okay, I'll do some more lines, and this time I want my lines to be different again from the lines that I've done previously with the drawing media. So this time it was a painted line and done more carefully and thinking about shape. So having done that, the next thing was to go back, and I did a little bit of free drawing over the top of that again. And I started to block out some shapes, thinking about lights and darks. But now, I've probably had this canvas on the wall 4 times to do 4 different layers on it. And now I'm starting to see things that excite me. And initially, these lines here, I loved them, and so I took them into the next painting, into another painting, and I did a similar thing. So when you're working in multiples, one idea on one painting can spark an idea on the others. But anyway, these now, I'm starting to get interested in this now, and I can see things that I like. I like these transitions of colours from sort of a soft pink into a yellow into a much deeper yellow. That's really interesting me. And the shapes that these lines are creating here, that really interests me. I love these sharp edges, and I like this green. So I've put a little bit more of that green in. So I'm starting to now get engaged in this. And so instead of coming in here and feeling like painting was a bit of a chore, I now feel like it's a bit of a treat. And so I've turned that whole thing around, and now I'm in it, and I'm loving the time that I'm spending in here. I've got my music on. I can raise the bar a little bit and say, okay, I'm going to spend at least 2 hours in here, and that time goes by really quickly. Just to recap, to put yourself in the environment where you would paint, to sort of optimize the chances of you getting excited and starting to get ideas, to inspire yourself with things that you have done before and things that you love in your own work and in the work of others, and just to get methodical, just to start spending a small amount of time doing something, and then you'll find yourself launching into your work. And as soon as you start putting down some layers, putting down some colours, mixing the paint, doing some shapes and starting things, the spark will come, and you'll enjoy your work, and you'll be away, and the new work will have begun. So I hope that helps.